Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast.
It's a tale of two very different trade negotiations. Last week, U.S. President Donald Trump imposed a 35% tariff on Canada. At the same time, he gave Mexico a 90-day extension on trade talks. This week, Canada's Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne and Foreign Affairs Minister Anina Anand were in Mexico meeting with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. They're hoping to strengthen economic ties between the two countries.
There's a recognition also that Mexico plays an extremely important role in the global economy. And we want to make sure that from a Canadian standpoint, we're recognizing that and we're leveraging it for the advantage of the Canadian domestic economy.
So what could closer trade ties look like between Mexico and Canada, and how likely is that to happen? And what is it about Mexico's strategy for handling trade talks with the Trump administration that's worked, at least so far? Emiliano Rodriguez Mega is a New York Times reporter based in Mexico City. Good morning.
Good morning, Sean.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum talked with U.S. President Donald Trump last Thursday in advance of the August 1st trade deal deadline. After that conversation, Donald Trump wrote on social media, in his words, "More and more we are getting to know and understand each other." What has Claudia Sheinbaum's strategy been?
Yeah, I think Claudia Sheinbaum's strategy has shifted. I think she did start using a more confrontational tone when these tariffs were first announced. She even poked fun at President Trump on some issues. For example, when he signed his executive order about renaming the Gulf of Mexico, she suggested the U.S. should be renamed Mexican America. But that strategy changed as she learned early on that confrontational tactics would only anger President Trump, really. And since then, Mexico and the U.S. have struck a more conciliatory tone. Mexico chose to negotiate, and I understand that Canada chose to negotiate as well, but it also chose to retaliate. Mexico has not retaliated in any way to President Trump's tariffs or even other measures that he has put forward. So I think that's a big difference. Up until, recently, as you said, despite the very different approaches that Mexico and Canada had followed, we were both in the same boat. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
She's been called a cool head. What is it about her personality that seems to be effective here?
I think President Sheinbaum, she's a trained scientist. She's considered to be less charismatic and in some way like less explosive than her predecessor, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and I think she's proven the point that she's not trying to pick a fight with the United States. But despite that, she's also tried to be firm on certain non-negotiables for Mexico. For example, she recently recalled a call that she had with President Trump in which he offered to send U.S. troops to Mexican territory to fight the drug cartels. And she said no, that would be in violation to Mexican sovereignty. She said that Trump understood that. Of course, days later, we saw President Trump say that she was too afraid of the cartels. But in some ways, the two leaders have managed to forge a relationship of respect, at least publicly.
In a post on Truth Social, Donald Trump wrote, "The complexities of a deal with Mexico are somewhat different than other nations because of both the problems and assets of the border." What is Donald Trump asking Mexico to do on its border with the U.S.?
One thing that's true is that these trade talks between Mexico and the United States have been about so much more than just trade. They have involved a lot of issues in terms of migration and security as well. And Mexico has already made a number of major concessions to try to appease President Trump. We saw the Mexican government deploy an additional 10,000 troops, National Guard troops, to its northern border. We've seen migration into the U.S. be, significantly curtailed. We have seen fentanyl seizures ramp up. I think even last month, President Sheinbaum said that they had dropped by nearly 50%, and that Mexican security forces were seizing even more fentanyl and preventing it from being smuggled into the U.S. Mexico has also extradited, I think, 29 cartel bosses to the United States. It's now supposedly negotiating a new security deal with U.S. officials that might involve intelligence sharing, like more enforcement coordination. So Mexico has done a lot. While some analysts and experts have pointed out that her ability to kick things down the road is impressive, and the latest example would be this 90-day extension that Mexico got. That doesn't guarantee Mexico will manage to secure a beneficial deal in the end, and they worry how much more Mexico will have to give until the Trump administration is satisfied.
In his first term, Donald Trump famously talked about getting Mexico to pay for a wall on the border. How do you explain the shift in tone from Donald Trump toward Mexico?
I mean, I think that's interesting, and I'm not sure I have a clear answer for that. I think part of it has to do maybe with the fact that he has, recognized how important Mexico is to the U.S. Mexico is the United States' largest trading partner. Our economies are so deeply integrated that, they are basically inseparable. It would cause a lot of harm to both countries to try to decouple our economies. And so I think maybe in part, President Trump and his team have realized that while they, still have an upper hand when it comes to Mexico, that, maybe a better strategy is to try to negotiate with them.
Here in Canada, there's an elbows up boycott on American goods, and many people will travel to the U.S. right now. How are Mexicans responding to the U.S. and its demands? And what do they think of Claudia Sheinbaum's handling of this?
I mean, based on what the latest polls say, President Sheinbaum is becoming very popular. Her approval ratings, some of which go above 70%, have soared, and many Mexicans have applauded the way that she's been able to manage President Trump and his threats so far. I think we've also seen some glimpse of a nationalistic movement here in Mexico. The Mexican government has even created an initiative to promote this sort of made in Mexico brand for several companies. But I don't think we've seen exactly the same thing that we've seen in Canada in terms of this elbows up strategy and trying to boycott sort of American companies and not travel to the US and stuff. As I said, Mexico heavily relies on the US, and many Mexican families know that. So yeah.
As we mentioned earlier, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand and Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne were in Mexico this week, and Prime Minister Carney and Mexico's Claudia Sheinbaum planning to meet at some point soon. What do we know about what was discussed this week?
I mean, we know that they met with President Sheinbaum, of course, and with several Mexican business leaders. I also know that they met with a number of Mexican ministers. I think Mexico's economy minister, Marcelo Ebrard, said that he was set to speak with Minister Champagne about the two countries' experiences in dealing with tariffs. Ebrard said that they were going to exchange experiences, that Canada is paying a 35% tariff and Mexico isn't. And he said that the ministers wanted to know how Mexico is getting these results. We know also, as President Sheinbaum said yesterday during her morning news conference, that these meetings were in preparation for a future visit by Prime Minister Carney to Mexico. and that they had agreed to sort of like expand trade relations between Mexico and Canada, which, we know that they could use some improvement. Mexico only accounted for 1% of Canadian exports last year, and Canada still represents a small portion of Mexico's export market, slightly over 3%. So closer ties with Canada would also make sense when it comes to something that Mexico has defended, that a strong and united North America is the only way that Mexico, Canada, and the United States can compete economically with other regions of the world, particularly China. So I think we can expect to see some deals moving these countries to that direction. And I think these meetings are also interesting in the context of the U.S. tariffs, because it's just interesting to see that Mexico and Canada are engaging in talks, and as the two countries have sort of like come to realize that the United States is not as reliable as a partner as it used to be. I don't think that we can expect to see, Mexico and Canada sort of like excluding the U.S. in any way from their deals. But maybe, diversifying their trade relations and like deepening, their commercial relations is something that we could expect.
Emiliano, thanks for talking to us this morning.
Thank you so much, Sean. Emiliano
Rodriguez Mega is a reporter for the New York Times based in Mexico City.
This has been The Current Podcast. You can hear our show Monday to Friday on CBC Radio 1 at 8:30 a.m. in all time zones. Or you can also listen online at cbc.ca/thecurrent or on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening.